So today is April 26th, 4/26. Happy Hemi Day, Mopar people. I told you you were probably going to get sick of this GTX because we've got a lot of ground to cover with it. But I figured today is a perfect time to do a video on how to identify a Hemi car. Right? All of the little things that Chrysler engineered into these things that make them unique and specific to the breed. And I'm not talking about numbers. You know, obviously, you know, there's data tags and there's VIN numbers, but I mean the data tag is held in place with 2 screws. The dashboard is held in place with 7 bolts, right? So it's easy enough to change these things out. And they sell the rivets on the 66, 67 cars like this one. You've got the VIN tag here, but like I said, they sell those rivets. It's no great magic to swap all this stuff out. So if you want to authenticate an actual Hemi car, you want to look for the things that Chrysler built into the unibody itself. Actually into the whole package, but specifically into the unibody. But before we get into that, I want to talk about this engine real quick. So if you watched this last video that we did on this car, everything around the motor was finger tight. I mean, it was a mess, okay? And a few things that were on top of the motor weren't what we thought they were going to be. But the motor itself was done by a machine shop in Texas back in 2003. And we went over all of the paperwork that came with it. I know everything was done to this engine, everything that's inside of the engine. And we dropped the pan, we checked the bearings, we checked the block over, the main bulkheads for cracks. We did all of that. Everything in the bottom, everything that comprises, you know, the long block assembly is good to go. We're content that all we have to do is just fill in the blanks around it and we should be good to go. But that said, that out of the way, let's talk about what makes a Hemi car a Hemi car. How do I identify one just by sight? I'm going to start with this thing that's on 1966 only cars, right? And it's obviously it's on this car because it's a 67, but it's easy enough to illustrate. 1966 Hemi cars had a bracket that was bolted right over here that holds the starter relay and the horn relay. Now in 1967, and they did that because where the valve cover is on this, obviously this area here is blocked off. So in 1966 they had the starter relay and they had the horn relay, which on this car is mounted up on the radiator support, mounted on this bracket, and it had a unique wiring harness. 1967 they changed the harnesses and, you know, all together and relocated these 2 items, and that bracket disappears. So, but like I said, that's 1966 only. There's not much that's specific Hemi above, you know, the top half of the car. It's all really down there, and most of it's in the back. But we'll start over here, because this, and they don't really consider this to be part of the unibody because it's the K-frame can be swapped out. It's 4 bolts. But all Hemi cars came with this skid plate right here. And the reason for that is that the oil pan, the Hemi uses a bigger oil pan than the regular wedge motor. So this skid plate protects the bottom of the oil pan. You'll find this only on 426 Hemi cars. And then beginning in 1969, well, the A12 cars have them. And then 1970 and 71, the 446 pack cars have them because they also use that deeper oil pan. So that's what we've got up here. Most of the stuff on the car is in the back. And the big item, the one that you can actually see if you're walking up on the car, are these things right here. These are the torque boxes. Now these torque boxes are standard on a convertible. All convertible Mopars, regardless of engine, have these torque boxes. And what they do is, the unibody, on all of these cars, the outer rocker is part of the unibody. And then you've got the rear frame rail starts over here and then, you know, runs back. The torque box ties these two, it's really a gusset that ties these 2 sections of the unibody together. The convertible has a unique rocker in that there's an extra piece of steel inside the rocker to help stiffen it. The Hemi cars don't have that. The Hemi cars have a standard production rocker, or a standard hardtop sedan rocker. But they added these torque boxes for two reasons. One is for the obvious benefit to keep the car from twisting, and you got this much power, things are going to want to twist. But also to back up the leaf spring perch. So right here is where the leaf spring mounts. Okay, and if the torque box wasn't here, you would be able to see the whole inside of this plate. The torque box gussets all of this in. Remember, 100% of the effort that the drivetrain is using to drive the car forward, 100% of it is focused right at this point. And that's why these boxes are here. Now, if we move to the back of the car, underneath, here, come around this way. So we want to look directly above the rear. Okay, can we see this? This is the pinion snubber support. So all Chrysler cars have a pinion snubber on the front of the differential, the front of the rear end. And on acceleration, the pinion, the front of the rear goes up, and it's got a piece of rubber on it, the snubber, and it contacts this bulkhead that they added to the floor of the car. On Hemi cars, and only Hemi cars, they added this plate right here. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but they added this plate, and this backs it up. It's an extra support for the pinion. Remember, this is a heavy car with a lot of power, and there's no way to predict how people are going to actually run this thing around. So power shift on cobblestone streets. There you go. This keeps this section here from caving in. So that support is something to look for real quick. Also, you notice that there's one exhaust hanger that's welded in place, it's spot welded in place, and then you've got this exhaust hanger that's bolted in place. So these are an add-on. That would be for any dual exhaust car, would have that, but obviously a Hemi car would be a dual exhaust, it'll have that plate. A lot of times people, they'll clone like a coronet or just a satellite, and they'll neglect that, right? So that's one of those details you always want to look for. Now, at the very back of the car, you have these items. Here, come around this side. You've got these plates, which, like the torque box at the front, tie the sub frame rail that the leaf spring hangs off of, that the shackle hangs off of, and the main frame rail of the car. They added this plate right here to gusset that in, to box that in. The only thing, I've never seen these talked about, a reason for these. The only thing that I could think of is this is a throwback to the NASCAR days when essentially they would take a stock car, right? Stock car racing, they would take a stock unibody, add a roll cage to it, and send it. And this right here would protect this section of the frame from the kind of lateral forces that you would get going around turns. That's the only reason I could think of for adding this plate right here. It's only found on Hemi cars. What else is there? You've got the stuff that doesn't bolt on the car, the accessories, but they're here just the same. If you come to this side, you'll see that on the passenger side leaf spring, you've got two extra half leaves, right? And that's to control axle twist. Remember, this side of the car wants this side of the rear end wants to go up. This side of the body wants to come down and make a sandwich out of the wheel. Well, these two extra half leaves over here act as a traction bar and a stiffening point to keep the back of the car stable. So all your Hemi cars are going to have these leaf springs like this. Fuel line. All of your single 4-barrel Chrysler cars from the era use a 5/16 fuel line. Multi-carb engines came with this 3/8 line. I mean, obviously you can't tell the difference looking at the video, the diameter of that, but the 3/8 fuel line is definitely something you want to look for. Again, if people are cloning these cars, a lot of times that's something they'll neglect. Other than those items, a Hemi car is really no different than any other car, but they're all like telltale. And they're easy to duplicate too, because if you notice, none of those components that are added to the unibody are spot welded in place. They're all kind of like just quick arc welding in place, like, you know, just assembly line sloppy welding. So they can be duplicated, but the odds of somebody going through all of the trouble to change all of those items, it doesn't usually happen that way. And to tell you the truth, if somebody has gone and they've changed the numbers and they've added all of those items to the car, it is completely indistinguishable. You could clone a 67 Satellite into a 67 GTX. If you've got the right numbers, the right plate, and you've added all of those pieces, no expert on the planet can tell you that it's not an original factory Hemi car. But those are the things that make a difference. Chrysler built, the numbers vary. Chrysler built somewhere between 10 and 11,000 426 Hemi cars between 1966 and 1971. The bulk of them were in 1966 and 1968. A lot of them survived. You'll still find, and you know, mostly it's because people who bought these things to drive them found out pretty quickly that they were miserable. They had a lot of things that would go wrong with them that would be just make it unpleasant, and the cars got rolled into the backyard, or they got wedge motors swapped into them, or the motor got pulled for a race car and the body just sat. So these cars actually have a much higher survival rate than most, than the typical 3D3 Roadrunner or Super B. So they're out there. You go hunt around, you'll find these things. They pop up all the time in barns, behind people's houses, and in junkyards. And there was this story. I was it's about 5 years ago. I forgot. It was maybe a little longer than that. It's about 5 years ago. I was going through one of the classifieds, and there was a Roadrunner, a '69 Roadrunner pops up, right? And it was like $800, whatever it happened to be. So I'm looking at the pictures of it. I see it's got a Hemi K-frame. I'm like, oh my God, $800 for a Hemi K-frame. For a car, probably a Hemi car. So this thing was I'm in Nashville, and this thing was in Lexington, Kentucky, in a junkyard. I dropped what I was doing. I ran out there like 90 miles an hour the whole way because, the ad had just been placed. I'm not going to let this thing get away. So I get to the car, and when I got to the car, somebody had broken out the dashboard and ripped the VIN tag out of it. It was a Hemi K-frame, but the whole bottom of the Hemi K-frame was missing. It had sat on the grass for so long, and the only thing I could find, and same thing with the floors, when I opened the door, there was no floor at all. But I reached around and I found the remnants of the torque boxes that were still under the car. But it was hopeless. There wasn't a single salvageable thing on this car. So, but that's it. I hope you got something out of that. We'll have the parts coming in for this. Andy's going to be back here next Saturday, so we'll start putting everything back under the car and start working under the hood. So within 2 weeks or so, I think we should have this thing up and running and melt those old tires off it. Happy Hemi Day, everybody. See you tomorrow.